Thank you, Ibrahim. And firstly, gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning on what is a very topical topic. Now, I think perhaps, let us perhaps set the scene, if I may pose a question to you, Fabian. A brief overview of MyDigital economic blueprint and its key thrusts, and then we can get into the meat, so to speak.
Okay, thank you, Dato. Good morning, everyone. Okay, let me start with the vision. Of course, the vision of the Malaysia Digital Economic Blueprint is for Malaysia to be the regional leader in the digital economy and achieve inclusive, responsible, and sustainable socio-economic development. It has three objectives, namely to encourage industry players to become creators, users, and adopters of innovative business models under the digital economy. And second one is to harness the human capital that's able to thrive in the digital economy. And finally, to nurture an integrated ecosystem that allows society to adopt digital economy. And there are 6 policy thrusts. Number one is to drive digital transformation in the public sector. That's very important. Then to boost economic competitiveness through digitalization, to build enabling digital infrastructure, to build agile and competent digital talent, to create an inclusive digital society so that no one is left behind, and finally to build trusted, secured, and ethical digital environment. I may just want to highlight a few of the initiatives under this blueprint. There are actually 76 initiatives, but I'll just highlight a couple important ones. Of course, number one is for broadband to be mandated as the basic infrastructure to ensure internet access for new developments, for equal access to broadband services. Of course, to introduce My Device program using public, private, people partnership to ensure all students in Malaysia can access to digital learning. And finally, to strengthen the data protection and related regulatory framework to ensure holistic personal data protection and privacy.
Thanks, Fabian, for setting that. I mean, clearly, a theme you've highlighted through 3 themes, but it's about inclusivity, if I may. And that then leads me on to my question to you, Dr. Fadullah, around the 21 billion Jendela plan. If we could perhaps give us a little bit of context, what's our progress since its unveiling in August of 2020, because it is a part of that inclusivity, providing 4G access to all, lifting that digital, if you like, removing the digital divide and the equal opportunities and perhaps some of the challenges that are being faced on the implementation by yourselves and industry players.
Thanks, Dato, for very good morning to everyone, and to my learned panelists, Fabian, and our distinguished moderator. Now, when you look at the Jendela was something that was mooted as a result of the severe pandemic that we all had faced in 2020. Okay, so it was announced on the 29th of August, and it is only hardly less than 14 months since that was announced. Now, in that 14 months, what had happened? Number one, we had identified the targets that Jendela needed to achieve. Okay, Dato mentioned the quantum of 21 billion that would be spent, and that amount of money comes both from the private sector by and large, as well as the government via the Universal Service Provider Fund managed by MCMC. Today, 14 months down the road, we have actually produced 4 quarterly reports, and thus far we have been able to achieve the quarterly targets set forth by the industry at the outset of the program. If I can give you a summary, the first key thing is to get fiberization out there. There are 9 million premises around the country. To date, we are at 6.47 million premises where we have fiber passed, okay, which gives us a huge number of premises that has access to fiber. That's the first. Second, in terms of the 4G coverage, we have increased it to close to 95% of the populated areas, and for the average broadband speeds on the mobile. Today we have hit 31 megabit per second from an earlier value of only 25 megabit per second in August last year. So there has been progress. Certainly there are challenges. Okay, people still do complain about quality of services. So as we had mentioned earlier, the first phase of our effort is to improve coverage, and second, we will then improve the quality of the services. Okay, and to that, we currently have the Jendela map that whereby individuals could then log in and do tell us where exactly the quality of service is lower than your expectation, so that the quality of experience would be at the level that befits your own utilization of the service. So, and last but not least, is to actually ensure that the policy of making broadband a utility is key. I'm pleased to inform that every state in Malaysia, save for Selangor, which is has got a bit of a slight challenge, have all adopted making broadband a public utility. Okay, and with that, the local governments have also adopted the various procedural requirements to make that a requirement for all new development. So, which is a good progress, because this is something that we had spoken about for many, many years. And in the last 14 months, this has been taken on positively by the state governments by and large.
Thank you, Dr. Fadula. So clearly we are becoming inclusive. We are removing the digital divide, and that's an excellent result. I think the next key enabler, of course, is cloud. And there was a statement of intent of migrating some 80% of public data to a hybrid cloud by the end of 2022. And if I could perhaps pose this question to Fabian, are we on track? We have 4 approved cloud service providers. What are you able to share with us about their plans and their respective roles? Without giving commercial secrets away, of course.
Okay, thank you, Dato. For that question, actually, this initiative is led by Mampu. Mampu is the lead implementing agency. And I can tell you that they're working very, very hard to finalize the contract. And yes, if we track their progress, all I can say is I can say that they are on track. But if it's still the thing that is still in the works, then I won't be able to discuss much more than that. Discuss much more than that.
I had to, Fabian, I had to ask the question. We were all
try.
wondering. We have to try. Okay, I mean, well noted. But besides the above, I mean, perhaps if we look at it from an investment perspective, what else can we do as a nation to attract more foreign and local investments, to position ourselves as a regional data hub? Because Malaysia is wonderfully positioned to fulfill that role. Fabian, your thoughts?
Okay, I mean, number one, of course, as you know, we are putting our act together with the what do you call establishment of MyDigital. I think we are trying to make sure that whatever is promised or put out in the digital economy blueprint is being tracked and ensure that it is clearly delivered. Number one, and then of course there's the facilitation process. In addition to having all these incentives put in place, we want to make sure that it's easy to do business in Malaysia. I think that's the number one, number one so-called proposition we had to drive further investments into the digital economy.
Thank you for that, Fabian. I mean, if I may, and turning the lens perhaps to the regulatory side, Dr. Fadula, what were the main objectives of the recently introduced cloud service regulation, which is to come in effect January 2022? What colour, I mean, there was some concern previously raised that the regulation could subject data centres and CSPs to comply with search and seizure orders by law enforcement agencies, and that would then discourage the data centres or would be self-defeating. Does the new regulation address these concerns, Dr. Fadula?
Before I answer that, let me just take a few steps back. You did ask about what will make Malaysia attractive. Okay, obviously there are three things that would make Malaysia attractive. Number one, it's connectivity. Okay, making sure that Malaysia is well connected to the international market. Second, you have a robust infrastructure domestically that allows for data to be moved quite instantaneously from point to point. Okay, and thirdly is to create a trusted environment. Okay? So on the first premise, you have the submarine cables landing, in Malaysia. A couple of investors have already made their public announcements of such. Well, we may win some, we may lose some in the submarine cable, they call, enabling to attract some of the cables, but that does not mean it's all lost. Okay. Second, we have got an increase in internet exchange points in the country. We are targeting to have 78 from 12 today, come 2025. And thirdly, is in relation to the trusted environment. So when you talk about trusted environment, what helps to provide a trusted environment? The trusted environment is when you have a regulatory framework that provides protection to both the investor as well as the end user of a service. Okay, so when you talk about the cloud services, data center for as long as it had been in Malaysia had always been licensed. Okay, let's not go away thinking that it was never licensed. It had been licensed from the year 2000. So that's 21 years ago. Okay, so the only thing that is new today is in relation to the cloud services, which is a very new technology, and it is open to concerns of data protection, both for the investor as well as the end user. And to your point about the lead enforcement agencies, by having a license, in this case, a very light touch license that costs no more than 2,500 a year, okay, of Malaysian ringgit, the licensees would be accorded a protection by way of the regulator, whereby you do not have to be subjected to to a very high handed approach of any law enforcement agency. Okay, because there will be guidelines that each licensee will adhere to, which will form a set of protection against any untoward law enforcement actions. But that does not mean that the law enforcement cannot take action if the law has been contravened, but it provides a protection whereby MCMC will then play the role of facilitation and making sure that the investment as well as the data residing within the cloud services is well protected for both the investor as well as the end user.
A very good point. I mean, looking at the question of the trusted environment. Now, clearly, CSP, data center, connectivity, and the missing piece, and we'll touch on, is submarine cables to strengthen international connectivity. Now, we have our submarine cables, and clearly, as we've all experienced, when the cable goes down, and it has happened from time to time, the region suffers because the bandwidth, if you like, is going from the US and coming to here, depending on who's streaming Netflix and Disney, etc., on a given day. Now, as you bring it in, we are building more capacity has been put in, and what we've seen is there's been a mention of some ringgit Malaysia 1.65 billion investment by a number of telcos in submarine cables up until 2023. Perhaps, Fabian, if you could provide a little bit of color around that connectivity and those investments, and how that will be a key catalyst and enabler for that transition for MyDigital as well as IDR 4.0.
Yeah, okay. Datuk, the 1.65 billion investment mentioned, I think these are numbers, if I'm not mistaken, these are numbers that turn up in the lab. I think Dr. Fazul can attest to that, because these are numbers that mentioned by the telcos in the lab when it was the National Connectivity Lab 2.0, if I'm not mistaken, that was conducted by MCMC. Of course, we are checking, to see whether these are being, delivered, as time goes on. So that's what I can tell you here. I'm not sure if Dr. Fazul want to add to that.
Well, with regards to the submarine cables, in general, most submarine cable operators do not publicly share information as to the plans. The plans will always be announced once they get the project to be green lighted by their shareholders. But nevertheless, like I said, there had been an earlier announcement by a cable provider, MIST, whereby they have provided intention of investing 400 million USD. So that basically quite close to the quantum that had been cited in the lab. And in reality, there will be a lot more cables that will be invested, but I'm not at liberty to share. All I can share is that there will be an aggregated capacity of north of 400 terabytes. Okay, today we are at 42 terabytes connected out of Malaysia, and that would grow by a good tenfold in the next couple of years.
Well, thank you. And if I may, a topic that has been some discussion in Parliament and even on TV, chat. I can see the smile on your face. You know where I'm going with this conversation. Cabotage. Now, clearly, I think we have a landing on it. Measures have been adopted to ensure that the policy is set, and repairs will be undertaken expeditiously, and then removing the concerns that were previously expressed. But Dr. Fadil, if you could give a little bit of colour on that, and I mean, there has been information and disinformation as the case. Well, let's take this opportunity to not say lay our cards on the table, but provide clarity to all our investors and those that have joined us this morning.
Okay. Let me just share with you a little bit of history. Okay, way back in 2010, I'm sure many of us will be familiar with the Economic Transformation Program. Okay, at that point in time, the connectivity out of Malaysia was less than 2 terabytes. Okay, and at that point, there was a target to do north of 7 terabytes. Okay, over a period of 10 years. Everybody felt that it couldn't happen, but look, today, 10 years, it's 10 years down the road, we've got 42 terabytes. So that is way above the 7 terabytes that we had actually, planned way back in 2010. If you look back in history, in 2010, the cabotage policy was already in place. All right, did that what you call prohibit any investment done on the submarine cables? Obviously, the numbers tell us a different story. And we've seen this debate about this cabotage policy and all. Now, if we cut through all the noise, the reality is that for any ships to undertake work in the country, they will need to have a license. That is called the DSL license, which was that's issued by the Ministry of Transport. Even during the period of 2010, the period of 2018, 2019, DSL was still key. And one of the biggest problems of DSL was the turnaround time. Okay, and that is when you have all these problems of late, repairs being undertaken. Today, as had been announced by the Minister of Transport, we no longer have DSL. What we now have is called EDSL, which means everything is now made online, and the approval for such a license is now shortened to as fast as only 1 day. Okay, and now that is a lot faster than the double-digit numbers that we used to face years ago. Okay, so in a way, this has made business a lot more simpler in the country. Let's cut through all the political agreement and disagreement, but just look at the process. The process is that the EDSL license takes you as fast as 1 day, or as late as 7 days at most, subject to documentation. And second, the process of approval no longer have a third party being in the process where it could cause conflict of interest. Okay, today that is all undertaken by government agencies, and hence we have a very expeditious approval process that we have today. And hopefully this will put the whole debate to rest, because what's important is to look at the real process, whether or not there is cabotage or no cabotage. DSL is there, and today we have EDSL. And hopefully that would put this debate to rest once and for all. And let's just not, let's move on to a different conversation.
Thanks, Dr. Fadullah, and thanks for that clarity. I mean, the key piece that has also been missing from the debate is, are there assets that actually can undertake the work in a timely manner as well? One part is the approval, the other is the actual vessel and the team that is needed to actually be deployed. And I do understand deployment can take some time. So it all augurs well for our movement in the development of our market and the development of both our digital industry as well as our seafaring friends. Now, moving on to another topic that has been of some debate and of much interest, because it is a key enabler, is National 5G Wholesale Network by DNB. Now, I'm not going to, if you like, if I may, what I'd like to explore is perhaps there have been different models, and we've chosen this model in Malaysia. And perhaps, Dr. Fadullah, a few thoughts as to why, in our mind, this is the right solution for us to provide clarity to our investors. Pardon me.
Well, coming from the CEO of Bursa himself, that's very good, very interesting, because what's important for your companies that's listed is to ensure that you have a very good healthy return on the shareholders' funds, right? And to do that, you certainly do not want to have additional financial burden on a company that could then limit its ability to provide dividends. So when you look at the whole network in the country, number one, JENDELA is in play from 29th of August. You mentioned the quantum of 21 billion. Okay, and that the figure could also increase simply because there will be higher demands for certain elements of the network that will require further investment. Okay. Can you imagine 21 billion being invested in the country over a period of less than 5 years? That's a lot of money to be expected to come out of a private entity. Load that up with the cost of 5G, that could run anywhere between as low as 7.5 billion per network. And if there are 4 networks, based on the report of the National 5G Task Force, you're looking at 30 billion. So all in all, you're looking at north of 50 billion play over a period of 5 years. Now, that's a lot of money. Okay, and the question is then, is that the right way for us to use our limited resource? Second, when you look at mobile networks, a key component in a mobile network is spectrum. Now, if you were to then have multiple networks, therefore the spectrum needs to be divided by the number of network providers. What happens is then is that as the users of data increases, the spectrum availability will then will be utilized pretty fast, and the next thing you know is that you end up having a congested network, which then negates all the efforts of wanting to have a speedier network called 5G. So taking into account the financial burden, taking into account the technical burden of demand, hence the single wholesale network was then mooted. Is that the best solution? In any given time, many models would come into play. It may have its pros and cons, but in our instance, we needed to expedite the rollout of 5G, earlier rather than later. The game plan was to roll out in 2023, but today we needed to roll it out by end of 2021, and hence the option of single wholesale network. Now, with a single wholesale network, we also identified all the downsides that would come with such a approach. And to do that, we have also undertaken our own study, and that study had been validated recently by Digital Economics by GSMA, where we said everybody is on the same page that there could be downsides. But these downsides are being treated. okay, and therefore we will see redundancy being put into play, equal access to the network, price per gigabit to be much cheaper than it would be on 4G, and all that will come into play with minimal duplication of networks. So a lot of arguments have been put out there, and I would say the best way to really debunk all of this is to see the realization of the network be made available commercially come December. So it's not too far away. We are today on the 9th of November. God willing, in about 30 to 40 days from now, that network would be available commercially.
Thank you, Dr. Fadul. I mean, the key thing is MC plays a role as regulator, and we'll be looking at what reasonable wholesale pricing, equal access.
Yep.
It is enshrined, and in many ways that will address the concerns. As you know, my previous life, I was building gas network, and you want. It is most efficient to have one operator rather than having multiple towers. I think we can all remember the days of Celcom and Maxis and multiple. No offence to my friends at Digi, of course, and Axiata, who are merging, but I'm winding back the clock sometimes. So it is about building networks efficiently and running them efficiently, and that is, if you like, the role of the regulator. I think. Would there be do we envisage the ability, say for example, as a developer, I want to incentivize the rollout to my area? Is that catered for, Dr. Fadul? And how would that process work? Because clearly competing resources, we have competing resources, not only in financial terms, but actually in capacity, right of way, access to site, etc.
Sure. Right. So this is where I mentioned just now, making broadband a public utility. Okay. Therefore, any new development, you will not get the right to develop unless you can provide in the plans that you will provide telecommunications infrastructure, both for fixed as well as for mobile. Okay. Now, once that happens, therefore, the service provider who would come into play would be the retail service providers. Friends like TM, Celcom, DG, Maxis, the guys that you know who offer services today. Okay, they will be the ones who will be linking up with the developer to make sure that the plans for infrastructure would be made available in the application for such a development. And this is where if 5G is a requirement, the very same service providers would actually have the right to buy access from DNB to then provide the 5G network into a given area. Okay, so this is where, if you want, you got to connect the dots between the wholesale player, the developer, as well as the retail provider just as well. Okay? And today, that is already available even in the 4G space, where you have what we call as virtual mobile virtual network operators, people who do not have a network, but they buy capacity of the mobile network operators. So imagine today TuneTalk. Okay, TuneTalk serves a whole big population of subscribers, but they don't own a network. They buy that network off one of the mobile network operators. So it's a similar model for the 5G just as well.
If I may pose a slightly cheeky question, which I've been known to do from time to time. How do we ensure that the rollout remains within budget? It's always a thorny issue, and it's a fairly large spend, of course. And so everyone, I mean, from a context, it needs to be on time, on budget, all those good things, and because it is an accelerated rollout. From a regulatory perspective, how does one say? Do we have teeth?
Well, with regards from the regulatory standpoint, okay, number one, the license would require DNB to roll out within the plans that they submit, because it is tied to their license. So that's the first thing. Second, the onus will be on DNB to ensure that the rollout is done within the set time frame, as well as within the set cost frame. Okay, because the access to the network would be fixed as a wholesale. Okay, therefore, you do not want to then price a product whereby the cost is much higher than the income that you get, okay, which is not going to do a world of good for the entity. So therefore, the onus will be on DNB to ensure that it remains within its given parameters of deployment. And third, we as a regulator, we will be monitoring the excess prices for wholesale, which again would limit the ability for DNB to raise its prices. Okay, simply because they say if they were to say that I would my cost has has gone beyond budget. Well, all we can say is that we take note of that, but as far as the excess prices goes, it is what it is that you have made publicly. So in a way, that is the control that we provide from a regulator standpoint to make sure that you do not have any cost overruns.
So there will be, if you like, there will be defined return on asset, very much like the PPAs for IPPs and so on.
Absolutely, that's something for DNB to deal with together with their financiers. Okay, so I'm sure you would have read that they have been given, I think the Ericsson, I think, had been given a financing, support by a financial entity, and I don't think money is being made available without any conditions. Okay, and therefore those very same conditions will be passed on to DNB. Okay, but that is not something that we as a regulator will put our nose and our finger into it, because that's something that the licensee will have to undertake on its own. But what is within our ambit is to always ensure that the cost of doing business, it is within the set parameters that we have set out under the wholesale access agreement.
Would those access agreements look at sorry, there's a little bit of background noise. Would those access agreements enshrine expected, SLAs are there, then there'll also be the costing of service provision. Does that relate back to the investment? One assumes so, Dr. Fadullah.
It would, okay. What would I would simplistically put it this way. Number one, the access agreement will come with service levels. Okay, therefore, when you purchase a product, you certainly want to ensure that you have a certain level of service. So that's the first thing. Two, in the event that there's non-delivery, there should be a penalty. Okay, therefore, plans in offering services that need to be adhered to just as well. Because a wholesale, the last thing you want is a retail provider committing to a customer, but the wholesale provider neglects its own, the delivery. And third, as in all businesses, the rollout plan is tied to a business plan, and that business plan provides the return on investment, if you want, as to the business. And you would have heard that the DNB as an entity is not there to be a competitor, but it works on a cost recovery model. So which means it will have to make sure that it runs a tight ship, it gets its cost returns, and the benefits of all those savings is then onwarded to the retail providers, which you and I as end users would be the end beneficiary.
Thank you. I think there is, we're beginning to come to the end of our session, and again, my thanks for joining us today, and of course our audience for inviting us into their homes, for those that are working from home in their offices or wherever they may be. Now, I think as of course the exchange, we know investors love return. The focus, we're in business to make money, and that's not a bad thing. We pay our taxes and we create jobs and so on. Now, as a national imperative, we need, we use the term ubiquitous, but easily access data. It is an enabler as we pivot to green. And for dear audience, I'm sure you've heard me at length talking about ESG, and we're not talking about ESG today, but actually data is a fundamental enabler. So if I may pose the question, strategically, how do we balance the need for affordable and ubiquitous and good service to Malaysians, while incentivizing investors to be in the space to actually provide this service. I imagine it is a difficult balancing act.
Well, from a regulator's standpoint, it is a very difficult question to answer. Okay, but certainly data would be the new oil. Okay, and to do that, for data to move around, okay, as I talked about the trusted environment, so that is going to be very, very key, both from a regulator standpoint as well as from policymakers, the likes of MyDa and all, because what you want is to have more investors coming into the digital space. Okay? The other part that I think the government is doing a lot of work on is categorizing data. Because today, our biggest challenge is how do we categorize data? Okay, so there's some data that is highly secretive, some data that is open for general public. Now, how do you make that distinction? So that's something that Mampu is already undertaking. Maybe Fabian could add a bit of color to that. But I do know that that is one of the very key things that we are doing. And last but not least, on our homework pad at MCMC is to look at the Digital Signature Act, okay, because at the end of the day, when transaction happens, you want to make sure that the data is connected to the right people, if you want. Okay, and a Digital Signature Act framework provides the level of recognition as to who sends out the data and who then receives the data, and in between there is already a framework that protects the data as it is transmitted along the corridor of the cloud.
So, I mean, so we provide investors certainty so that they understand exactly obligations and also the protection they'll receive. I think the other piece, of course, if I can pose a question to you, Fabian, incentives. How do we balance up ensuring, because I look at Malaysia as highly strategic in our role, and if we look at where we're sitting in within ASEAN or Southeast Asia, geographically we are nicely situated for the laying of submarine cables and so on. So, but we need to remain competitive. So balancing up, then we have regulation on one side, but then on the other side, we now need to be considering what incentives do we provide and landing points and so on.
Okay. Well, when we talk about incentives here, people normally, they think about financial incentives, tax incentives, or grants, and so forth. But I don't think incentives can just be categorized as those kind of incentives. You also need to have a healthy ecosystem, to support their business operations and growth, and then of course the right talent and so forth. We have programs like, for example, to attract foreign investment. We have introduced the digital investment office that looks at digital investments and try to attract foreign investors to set up their operations in Malaysia. Whereas for local operations and all that, we also have nurturing programs that's under MDAC, and then you have the National Technology and Innovation Scheme to support innovation and tech development. You have new allocations recently announced, such as the 30 million, I think, or so, to set up the Industrial Revolution 4.0 International Innovation Hub at TPM, or Technology Park Malaysia. Then there is this announcement on DESAC, or the Digital Ecosystem Acceleration Scheme under MyDa, to assist digital technology and digital infrastructure providers.
Now, as we're moving into, if I may, audience, if you have questions, please do pop them through on Slido. I have a number from the floor. Perhaps I think there's an interesting piece as a key enabler. I mean, data is a key enabler. We're building the infrastructure. We're providing a conducive regulatory environment. I mean, from the context, from your perspective, gentlemen, how does our current policies, if you like, we're very unicorn focused at the moment at the exchange. It is a very topical matter. It is bringing, if you like, new economy to market, new economy to Malaysia. And so your thoughts on how current digital policies support the growth of this pivot to new infrastructure or the new economy or the Internet of Things, manufacturers of content as well as hardware. Your thoughts? Dr. Fadullo, I don't want me to put you on the spot, but Fabian wasn't making eye contact with me through the camera, so I'll ask you first.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, you look at actually when you look at data as an economy, right? Many things need to happen. Okay? Whilst on one hand we talk about the ease of doing business, but more importantly, I think the outlook of the country needs to change. Okay, whereby when you look at digitalization, we have to realize that Malaysia cannot compete in the wider economy the same way it used to compete before. Okay? Today, I think we can no longer compete on cheap labor. Okay, but we certainly will be able to compete with value-added services. Okay, because the level of education in the country has reached a different level than what it used to be many years ago. Okay, so today, while manufacturing will still be the name of the game, but the question is, what type of manufacturing do we need to talk about? When you talk about services, how do we then move into value-added services? Because there are many countries, if you look around the world, where they may not have the right level of natural resources, but they make a name for themselves in the economic world simply because they were able to then leverage off their greatest asset, their people. Okay, and for that, this is where I would say when you look at the new economy, Malaysia is poised because we have the right level of workforce. The question now is how can we again harness this workforce by way of existing manufacturing and businesses that we have today to use this workforce to offer better value-added services to the greater market. So if you want, moving up the value chain of the whole value chain of a particular industry.
Yeah.
Maybe?
Okay. If I may add to that, Dr. Fazullah is talking about the businesses and all that, but the other moving parts of the economy, for example, the government transformation into a digital public service, digital public service delivery to assist the private sector or to facilitate the private sector, and then the education system. I think on top of all that, there needs to be a national ambition. There needs to be a national, I would say, not only ambition but obsession, to make Malaysia digital nation by say 2025. Now, how do we do that? If I look at it, we always use ease of doing business ranking, and now of course World Bank has discontinued that. Then you have the indexes that measure the digital competitiveness of the country. Now we are saying number 26, if I'm not mistaken. The last couple of years, we have been sliding down, not because we are doing badly, but because other economies have been catching up. I feel there has to be an obsession to put us to say top 10 in the next couple of years. So we have to work towards that, and that message has to be spread all throughout you know the country, to all the various players.
Yeah, I think it's a key. I mean, for example, we look at Bursa. Today we're on-prem. The conversations we're having, we want to go off-prem, but we're actually looking at cloud as a service. How can we deliver the service we have today? I mean, our aspiration is to democratize investing, and that would be using a handheld. This is no advertisement for whichever brand of handphone I use, but it's an empowerment tool. So data is clearly empowering the change. It drives efficiency, it aids collaboration, as we've seen during the pandemic. Even as we move into endemic status and offices and buildings and businesses are opening again, we're all being very mindful of staying safe, and I think that's the key, and hence we're all not in a big room today, but we're doing this virtually, and I think we have efficiency. We're having, to be frank, we're having a wonderful conversation, sharing our thoughts, taking feedback from the participants who are posing another question. Now, as the clock is winding down, I think if I may pose one question, and I'll pose it to you, Fabian, first, if I may. In closing, what key competitive advantage would differentiate Malaysia from our regional peers as we fight for capital and access and so on for digital investments? Just top of mind.
Well, I guess the most important thing for us, is to be, to have that enabling environment, business friendly, ensuring that we, speed of doing things, that is key. Of course, to enable speed of doing things, again, it's a chicken and egg thing. You have to have digitalization in place. Otherwise, how do you speed up, the processes? So, and of course, transparency is one thing. And for me, as you digitize your processes and all that, you also offer transparency, because you can't hide with data, right? Once it's made available, and once the process is digitized, you can hide those things. Those are now made transparent. So those are very important things.
Thank you so much, Fabian. And if I may pose the same question to you, Dr. Fadullah.
Yeah, I think one thing is the paradigm shift. Okay, if we are to remain competitive, okay, be it in the region or in the world, number one is the paradigm shift. We need to move away from bureaucratic thinking, okay, because processes that gets digitized should actually reduce the bureaucratic processes, okay, which will then allow businesses to flourish, decisions to be made faster, be transparent, and obviously that will make Malaysia very attractive for investment, be it physically or even investment that could be connected to Malaysia virtually.
Thank you. Now, our time is drawing to an end, so on behalf of the Exchange and our co-CGS-CIMB, our sponsor today, I'd like to thank, and on behalf of the audience, and myself in particular, I'd like to thank Dr. Fadullah Suhaimi Abdul Malik, Chairman, Malaysian Communication and Multimedia Commission, and of course, Mr. Fabian Bigar, Chief Executive Officer of MyDigital, for spending time with us today and sharing your thoughts, and to be quite frank, your candor and honesty. It's always good fun to talk, gentlemen, and I'm looking forward to seeing the rollout of 5G and how it enables new businesses to flourish, new ideas, and the whole, if you like, the whole onshore-offshore conversation as we roll out more network onshore, as well as the submarine cables that make it all happen for content. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a very great day.
Thank you again.
And more importantly, please stay safe.